Hello everyone, welcome back to Blockman Editor tutorial. In these videos, we will give you a complete introduction to the Blockman Editor. In this video, we will learn about the trigger nodes of the union and the mesh part. Alright, let's get started. Union is a model formed from at least two parts by the union, intersect, and subtract operations in the top menu bar. A union has been prepared in the scene, select it, and you can see that its properties are almost identical to those of a part. In addition to the properties, the union's trigger nodes are also similar to those of the part. Open Union's Trigger Edit screen and click the New button. You can see that the union has 4 trigger nodes, which are, when the union is clicked, when the union is touched by an entity, when an entity is leaving the surface of the union, and when an entity launches a missile and the missile hits the union. Next, we will use the trigger nodes, when the union is clicked and when the union is touched by an entity to present these two examples. Please try out the other nodes in your own time. Next, let's have a look at the first example's effect. When an entity clicks on the display case in the scene, it will obtain an item. The display case model is created by using the subtract function on multiple parts to form a union, so when the entity clicks on the display case, it is clicking on the union. Select the union, open its trigger edit interface, and create a new trigger node, when the union is clicked. To add items to a player entity, use the Add Items to Player node under the Item node. Connect the entity parameter to the entity which clicked the part under the current trigger parameters node. For the item parameter, select the item that we have prepared. The quantity parameter refers to the number of items given to the player entity each time the union is clicked. In our case, we can just fill it in with 1. Go back to the editor, click Run, and let's see the results. As you can see, when clicking on the display case, the entity successfully received an item. Now let's look at the second example's effect. When an entity touches the different colored mirrors in the scene, the entity's appearance model will change to different ones. These mirrors are also unions made with parts. Let's select a mirror and open its trigger edit screen, create a new trigger node, when the union is touched by an entity. To change the appearance model of an entity, use the Set the Entity's Actor Model node under the Entity node. The entity parameter connects to the entity which touches the part under the current trigger parameters node. The model parameter selects the prepared actor file. Go back to the editor, click Run, and let's see the results. You can see that when the player entity touches the mirror, the appearance model of the player entity changes. If we drag the mesh model file from the assets view into the game scene, the mesh model will become a mesh part. As you can see, the properties of a mesh part are also almost identical to the properties of a part. Let's open the trigger edit screen of the mesh part, and see what trigger nodes it has. You can see that the mesh part has 4 trigger nodes, namely, when the mesh part is clicked, when the mesh part is touched by an entity, when the entity is leaving the surface of the mesh part, when the entity launches a missile, and the missile hits the mesh part. Next, we will use the trigger nodes, when the mesh part is touched by an entity, and when the entity is leaving the surface of the mesh part to demonstrate an example. Please try out the other nodes in your own time. Now let's look at the example's effect. When an entity touches the mesh part in the scene, a specific model is generated at a designated location. When the entity leaves the surface of this mesh part, the mesh part will disappear. Next, let's see how to achieve the effects we just described. First, we need to prepare some models in the component library, but for this example, we have already prepared them in advance. Next, we place a mesh part in the scene, and open the trigger edit screen for this mesh part. Then, click on the new button, and select when the mesh part is touched by an entity. Drag out the action node list, and select Generate Components from Component Library under the Part node. We can pick a model from the component library here in the component parameter. Selects the current map 003 for the map parameter. For the position parameter, you can select it by clicking on the position icon, and enter the game scene. This completes the logic of generating a specified model, at a designated location after touching the mesh part. Click on the Add Trigger button in the upper left corner to add a new trigger node, when the entity is leaving the surface of the mesh part. To make the mesh part disappear, we can simply destroy the mesh part. Select Destroy Mesh Part under the MeshPart node. Connect MeshPart parameters to MeshPart under Current Trigger Parameters. After completing the logic, go back to the editor, click Run, and let's see the results. As you can see, when the entity touches the mesh part, the specified model is generated in the scene. After the entity leaves the mesh part disappears. That's all for this video. We hope it can help you on your way to a great creator. If you want to know more about the editor, you can comment below the video or post on the official forum. See you in the next video.